We got the news a few days ago that offensive coordinator Ben Johnson was going to stick around with the Detroit Lions, and the hashtag going around, like the mantra going around for the Detroit Lions players and coaches, is unfinished business. Getting up to the NFC Championship game and losing after blowing a 17-point lead with the San Francisco 49ers. So a lot of the players and coaches want to finish what they started. And that's what Ben Johnson said he wanted to do. He wanted to finish what he started here in Detroit. And I believe him. I believe that that's exactly what him and other players want to do. And I think that winning a Super Bowl could spell the end for the Detroit Lions partnership with Ben Johnson. But I also think he could stick around as well, because just because a coaching job opens up doesn't mean it's a good fit for said person. And I think that we've seen that 2 years in a row now from Ben Johnson when it comes to not only the Carolina Panthers, but the Washington Commanders. Now, reports were coming out that Ben Johnson was the favorite to land that job, and some of you believe that he was already there. Then it came out after he passed on the job that he was, no, actually before that they still wanted to interview, and they weren't sold on Ben Johnson. Well, now it's coming out a little earlier this morning that a lot of that decision could have fallen upon Ben Johnson as well. If we go back to the Carolina Panthers team last year, remember Ben Johnson was like a shoe-in. It was almost the exact same scenario, that he was a shoe-in. He was going to take the job, and it was just a matter of time before it was announced. And then all of a sudden, he decides, meaning Ben Johnson, to stick around in Detroit. And then they give the job to Frank Reich, and look what happened. He got fired with, 6 games to play. They were 0-10-1, I believe it was, or something like that, or maybe they were just 0-10, and he got fired. And they had fired, meaning the Carolina Panthers, 2 coaches in 2 years. Matt Rule got fired, and then they fired, and they're still paying him, by the way. Then they fired Frank Reich, right? So you kind of could see that the writing was on the wall for Carolina. Then you go to the Washington Commanders, and it looks like that it could be another reason why Ben Johnson did not take that job with the Washington Commanders. Now, this is coming from, you got to take this with a grain of salt. There's 2 parts to this, and we're going to talk about each of them. Says this is from who was this that said this? According to ESPN. And it was a reporter from ESPN says, was told that Ben Johnson was turned off by Commanders ownership, that they're, quote, basketball guys, end quote, and felt that they were a little too confident in their football operations. This has come from Jenna Lane, what she posted online. I also heard that he, quote, didn't interview well, end quote. He said, but clearly not a good fit for both sides. Now, I'm going to break this up. The whole didn't interview well thing, they were en route to interview him again. Every coaching job had been filled at this point. This was the only spot left, or I want to say Seattle might have been about to be filled. And they're heading back to interview Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. He didn't interview well, but he interviewed well enough to have a second or a third interview, right? So I'm not sure I buy that part. But I do buy the beginning about he was turned off by the Commanders' ownership and that they were a little too confident in their football opinions. If we go back to a guy like Jerry Jones, who is the owner, he is the general manager, he is the end-all be-all when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys, which is one of the reasons that the Dallas Cowboys are in the position that they're in. He is outspoken. He has way too much opinion, and his hands are in the pot too much. Then if we go to the Detroit Lions have an owner in Sheila Hemp that has put the right people in place. Last year gave Ben Johnson a pay increase. Everybody pretty much has stuck around, and he's decided, you know what? This is the place I want to be. Because you go over there, and Ben Johnson knows this too. There's been no Detroit Lions head coach that has been hired as a head coach as another team, not including interim coaches. But if you come and if you go to a team and you are a head coach and you fail as the head coach, you are going to wind up coming back as a coordinator somewhere. Now you might not get another chance like a Dan Quinn or those guys. There have been several people who were coordinators, head coaches, coordinators again, and then they have a second stint as a head coaching candidate or, going around as a head coach. First Quinn with the Atlanta Falcons, and now he is the head coach of the Washington Commanders, is Dan Quinn. So for me, I think that there is some validity to the comments that Ben Johnson say this stuff. I'm not going to say he said that, knowing that everything, his words can be put out there. This was probably alluded to, or maybe the person who reported this picked up on it and decided to kind of put their own spin on it. But I think that there is some truth to the fact that Ben Johnson, you have a good thing in Detroit. And when you go become a coach somewhere, you want to make sure that that organization is the right fit for you, because you can have it. I mean, this is the same team that didn't hire Bill Belichick either, because he wanted, if I'm not mistaken, it was the Washington Commanders who passed on Bill Belichick because he wanted more power than they were willing to give him. He was the general manager in New England as well. So I'm not saying that Ben Johnson wanted to be the GM. I'm just saying you kind of can get a vibe from people. And the Washington Commanders have been through a lot. Their fan base has been through a lot. They need a new stadium. They had to change ownership. They had the most sacked quarterback in the league. You got this offense with all these pieces that can't move. And here you're picking second in the draft, right? You have the defense that you traded away 2 core pieces, and now you're picking second in the draft. So I think, and this was done, I want to say that the trade was after the team was sold, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a lot to be desired with the Washington Commanders, and I think Ben Johnson saw that. So do I believe that he interviewed poorly? I don't think so, because why would you have a second or third interview with a guy who didn't interview well? Like, you're just going to keep giving him chances. I think that Ben Johnson decided, because it wasn't like the Washington Commanders passed on him. They were en route to meet with him and Aaron Glenn when they got the information that he wanted to stay. Ben Johnson is a smart man. He's a smart man, and this is the second time that he's made a decision that it looks like it's good. The first time definitely turned out in his favor, and I think this is going to be the same way. Although I'm sure another job will open up, he wants to finish what he started here in Detroit, and then after that happens, he'll take a job somewhere. But even so, he'll take a job only if it works for him. This is the same guy that is putting the Detroit Lions offense in this, vaunted position, top 5. We've ended both years that he's been in front of the offensive coordinator position. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How much of this report do you believe that Ben Johnson was reportedly turned off from the Washington upper brass, that they were too involved? They valued, I like this, were a little too confident in their football opinions. I like that Ben Johnson knows how to bring a winner, and he wants to be sure that he can do that without being stifled by ownership. And that's one thing that I can say. There's a lot of good things I can say about Sheila Hamp, but one thing, I think the most important thing, is she's put the people in place to succeed, and she's gotten out the way. And a lot of times when you see these owners that are successful, that's what they do. They get out of the way. They let the football guys do what they're paid to do. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As you can see, I'm feeling a little bit better. Still get a lot. I'm getting tired and hot easy, but I do feel better than I did early in the week. And I just got to say something too that I forgot to mention in my earlier video. We lost somebody yesterday that is a big part of my childhood. Carl Weathers, the guy who played Apollo Creed, was the first time I saw him. He was actually undrafted. He played in the NFL for, I want to say, 2 years with the Oakland Raiders, or LA Raiders at the time. It was one of them. And he had some time in football. You can kind of tell he was actually a linebacker. Then he went to go play in the 70s. This is early 70s, so this is before I was born. He played for the Raiders, and then he wound up playing for the BC Lions in Vancouver for the CFL. And he passed yesterday at 76 years old, and he was a big part of my childhood. From Rocky to Action Jackson to The Predator, all that stuff that, some movies I probably shouldn't have seen as a child, but Carl Weathers was a big part of. And Sylvester Stallone said yesterday that Rocky couldn't have been Rocky without Carl Weathers. And it's unfortunate because he kind of reminded me of my dad, and him and my dad are, as a matter of fact, my dad is like a year older than him. And I always looked at him as kind of, I don't know, man. I never looked at him as an antagonist. I always looked at him as the guy that, because over the course of Rocky, if he was an antagonist, then he was the guy that helped Rocky find the eye of the tiger and was in his corner when he fought Mr. T, and then wind up, man, it would have been nice to see him not die in Rocky IV. But anyway, Carl Weathers is so much more than, and of course we get to the Mandalorian and all this other stuff. He's so much more than the characters that he played. But Carl Weathers passes, he died peacefully in his sleep, and you know, it just brings mortality that we're not young anymore, and you know, it's kind of crazy. But anyway, let me know your thoughts, man. Put your favorite Carl Weathers moment of anything in the comment section below. And Carl Weathers, man, not only did he remind me of my dad, but he also was a big part, a huge part. Rocky IV was the first Rocky that I remember, because I was born for Rocky right after Rocky II. And then Rocky III, obviously, I'm like 3 years old. But Rocky IV was right when HBO, got HBO, had this huge antenna on the roof. It was like as big as a car back in the mid 80s. And if you know about home box office, before, when it was old school, like 80s and 90s, they used to show the same movie all the time. And when we got it, Rocky IV was that movie. So it was like Sylvester Stallone battles the Russians in Rocky IV. And it would play, and then it would have like a little intermission, and then it would play again. They just would repeat Rocky IV just like you were at the movies. You know how you watch the movie, and then there's an intermission, and then they show the movie again. That's what HBO used to be back in the 80s. It wasn't, you know, all these different movies. It was one movie that they would play, and then they started to, you know, so I know this video went all crazy and everything like that, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned Carl Weathers and how, you know, big of a point. And Rocky is not Rocky without Apollo. And yeah, it kind of sucks, man, because it just reminds you that you're not going to live forever. So anyway, let me know your thoughts, man, on not only Carl Weathers, but Ben Johnson. And do you think that he made the right decision? I do. I think he did. And I appreciate you guys watching this far. You guys are awesome. Take care of yourself and each other. And as always, and thank you also for the well wishes of me battling this thing known as COVID, man. And as always, go Lions.